Welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I am your host, Ryan Mckern. Join us tonight again in the French Quarter of New Orleans as we investigate the history and haunted tales of the Andrew Jackson Hotel, a charming and quaint place tucked into the history of yesteryear of Louisiana. Sit back and dwell in the darkness, mon ami. Warm yourselves by the proverbial fire. Les bon temps roulés. And welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave. Beautiful wrought iron balconies overlook bustling Royal Street. And, often enough, street performers are camped out on a block. Our haunting sounds of blues hang in the breeze with jazz serenades of a June bug marinade. Just as a soulful voice sings rocks your back on heels in awe of Mardi Gras. The Andrew Jackson Hotel is situated in the heart of the French Quarter, amidst all the entertainments and culture the city has to offer. The hotel even has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1965. And though the two-story brick building has existed on the lot since 1890, the history of this land transcends centuries. It only makes sense that the hotel's ground carries the residential energy and paranormal activity of the spirits and ghosts of all who came before the Andrew Jackson. The history of the Andrew Jackson Hotel, the boarding school. 18th century New Orleans was a pit of disease, death, and oftentimes destitution. It was not uncommon for families to lose loved ones, especially during the yellow fever epidemics that ravaged the city nearly every summer. Childhood mortality rates were exceedingly high, but strangely, it was often the adults who succumbed to the disease. Men between the ages of 15 and 40 were even more susceptible to the grisly yellow fever, almost always certainly dying and leaving their respective families without a head of the household. Ironically enough, if a person managed to survive the bout of yellow fever, which included, but not limited to, high fevers, vomiting, chills, jaundice, and liver failure, he or she became immune for life. And thus, yellow fever became a rather perverse game of Russian roulette for the thousands of people which it plagued every summer. With so many children in need of schooling, either those with parents or those who had been left without, the plot of land which the Andrew Jackson Hotel sits on presently was at first an all-boys boarding school, installed in 1792 by the Spanish colonial government. The boarding school saw initial success, but the longevity of the school was not destined to be. In 1794, two fires swept through the city. The first was smaller, but one account goes as far as to say that the boarding school, though they used the term orphanage, swayed and shook as a hurricane whirled through the city, the fire nipping on its heels. There is not much information on the cause of this particular fire, but the second one in December of 1794 was said to have consumed the city and all of its structures, including the boarding school itself. For more information on the 1794 Great Fire of New Orleans, please see my previous episodes as I go into depth about this tragedy. For nearly a century, historians and archaeologists alike have concluded that the boarding school burned in the fiery grips of a citywide fire in 1794. While digging into Andrew Jackson's hotel history, some would come upon something a little strange. An article dated from the 1850s listed the property at 919 Royal Street was one of the few buildings to survive the Great Fire, when all that proportion of New Orleans was devastated. Later, the article goes on to say that when in 1803, Louisiana Purchase was signed, the property was converted into the federal courthouse. And even up until the time in which the article was written, 919 Royal Street underwent very minimal architectural alterations. If this is the case, did a smaller fire perhaps still wreck the boarding school that once existed on this very site? That question remains unanswered for now. And yet, if those reports are to be believed, 5 boys perished in that fire that December, and it seems that the ghosts of those young boys have not left the site in which they have died. The Andrew Jackson Hotel is the site of the U.S. federal courthouse made famous for finding the General Andrew Jackson for contempt of court in 1815. Jackson had arrived in New Orleans in December 1814 to bolster the city's defenses against a possible British invasion. He declared martial law against the British and a military defense. Regardless of a great victory against the British at the Battle of New Orleans the following January, Jackson refused to lift the order months afterward. When a senator expressed his unease about the order, Jackson had him arrested. When a judge ruled that the senator be released, Jackson ordered the judge to be held in jail. When Jackson eventually lifted the martial law, the judge returned and charged Jackson with the contempt of court in the tune of $1,000, which Jackson paid. By the time of March 1815 rolled around, it would be safe to say that a good many people in the city were tired of Jackson's high-handed ways. One man in particular, Louis Loyal, a member of the state legislature, anonymously wrote an article in which he completely criticized Jackson's tactics. Naturally, Jackson discovered Louis's identity, and naturally he had Louis imprisoned. An order for Louis's release was given on one Judge Hall. Naturally, Jackson then had the judge imprisoned too. Judge Hall was banished from the city of New Orleans on Jackson's orders until the time that the peace treaty was realted. Ratified and the Brits had fled Louisiana's coastline. Only then did Jackson's release of all his prisoners. On Judge Hall's return, however, his fury knew no bounds. He demanded Jackson appear at the courthouse, the latter of whom he apparently showed up dressed shabbily as a civilian. Though Jackson requested a trial by jury, Judge Hall refused and slapped the general with a $1,000 fine. Though many New Orleanians offered to pay Jackson, whom they loved so dearly, he rejected the offer and asked that people give their money to the widows and orphans of New Orleans, who had lost their fathers, husbands, and brothers in the Battle of New Orleans. In 1844, the year before Jackson died, Congress actually ordered that the fine delivered by the Judge Hall be repaid to Jackson with interest. He was then given $2,700. The courthouse remained on the plot of land, tragically drama-free as Jackson had moved on to become president, until the building was demolished in the early 1900s. The structure that is the Andrew Jackson Hotel was constructed in its place. The Andrew Jackson Hotel as it stands today. While giving us a tour of the property, Cody McLean, the assistant general manager, expressed that his love for the Andrew Jackson Hotel is deep. And I quote, "This is a landmark, an actual landmark. That means that something of historical value has happened here." End quote. And that's certainly true. Today, the Andrew Jackson Hotel is one of the most stayed in and visited hotels in the French Quarter, priding itself on offering European flair with French Quarter hospitality. The Andrew Jackson Hotel has the top-notch amenities visitors in New Orleans like to enjoy. Free in-room breakfast for those late mornings after Bourbon Street, a 24-hour front-end desk, and valet parking. Not to mention walking street on one of the best streets of the French Quarter, Royal Street, which has exquisite restaurants, antique shops, art galleries, and more. What the Andrew Jackson Hotel truly embodies is a building that transports guests to a bygone era. 18th century furniture decorates the guest rooms and main lobby. A gorgeous interior courtyard provides seating for those seeking a tranquil atmosphere away from the noise of the French Quarter. Quite plainly, the hotel's rich history appears to seep from the walls itself. If the walls of the hotel could say anything at all, one thing they would say assuredly remarked upon would be Andrew Jackson's flair for the paranormal, and the ghosts who still walk the corridors of the historic building, as McLean told us. And I quote, "This one has my heart because of the history, and I'll admit it, the ghosts too." End quote. But which ghosts are still haunting the historical property today? It seems that the ghosts of the 5 boys who perished in the fire still haunt the hotel today. The ghosts of these young boys have been heard playing in the courtyard in the middle of the night. One guest even reported being woken up from his sleep because of the static noise coming from the TV. Leaning over to grab the remote control, he wondered how the TV had been turned off, since he had shut it off before closing his eyes for the night, and had set the remote on a bedside table. Shifting up in bed, he aimed the remote at the TV, only to involuntarily freeze at the sight before him. Seated before the TV on the ground was the ghostly apparition of a young boy. The guest released a hoarse shout, and the apparition vanished immediately from sight. Cody McLean informed us that the ghosts of the children who perished in the fire are not relegated to one area of the hotel. They've been heard by room 208, 107, 109, and even within the courtyard space. But one recent guest heard something slightly different than childish laughter or gentle footsteps padding about. After spending the night, she broached the front desk to explain that she had heard what she interpreted as cereal being poured into the ground. Then, the unmistakable noise of a childlike giggling. McLean then said immediately told us that he had no idea what could have caused cereal to be spilled. Moreover, that was the first time he had ever heard of such a thing from one of the hotel's guests. One has to wonder, is this one of the ghostly children playing harmless pranks upon the living? It definitely seems safe to say that the ghostly children who have remained in the Andrew Jackson Hotel have set about making themselves incredibly comfortable in their surroundings. Room 208, the haunted room. Guests who stayed in room 208 have witnessed numerous paranormal sightings, especially that of a ghostly child named Armand. Various tales have been spun about Armand, all of which reflect upon the young boy's rather horrific death. In one account, Armand was thrown from the second-floor balcony. In another, Armand committed suicide, launching himself off the balcony to his death on the street below. Despite confusion on just how poor Armand died, his spirit has never left the Andrew Jackson Hotel, and room 208 seems to be his preferred haunting spot. Armand's spirit has been known to wake guests from their sleep with his childish and ghostly giggling and laughter. At other times, people staying in room 208 have actually been bodily shoved out of their bed from an unseen paranormal force. Others have reported that while sleeping, they felt the covers being tugged down as a cold caress skims their exposed flesh, and a chill sweeps over their bodies. Armand's ghost doesn't appear to be aggressive, but it is clear that he likes to play games with the living. But it's possible that Armand is not the only spirit haunting room 208. After staying an hour or two in room 208, many guests have actually clambered down the stairs to the front desk in a hope they might be able to switch rooms. Whenever the front desk attendant asks the reason for the switch, guests exclaim that they experience a strange, eerie feeling within the room, as though someone or something was watching them. Overhead lights switch on, but with no rational explanation, the faucets are known to turn on by themselves. Personal belongings have disappeared, sometimes to appear at another area of the room, other times to never reappear again. Is the ghost of Armand responsible for all the pranks and paranormal activity in room 208? Could be entirely possible, but it also seems unlikely the spirit of a young child would have the ability to make the living such a sense of dread or despair. Perhaps it is just child's play. Either way, if you happen to run across the spirit of Armand, please be respectful and pay grace. While room 208 may contain a dark spirit, or a light spirit of the child, the Andrew Jackson Hotel is also haunted by the ghost of a woman who may be suspected to be a housekeeper in the hotel at some point in the long history. Her spirit is known to straighten towels, fluff pillows, to reset furniture arrangements on a particular liking, In the Andrew Jackson, it's not uncommon at all to re-enter a room and find the chairs moved closer to the window or swapped around entirely. Members of the cleaning staff have expressed the feeling of being watched while they go about their daily routine. Though most of the staff assumes that the ghost of the housekeeper is responsible, disembodied footsteps are heard climbing the stairs, up and down at all times of the day and night. The ghost of the caretaker has been spotted most frequently in the lobby of the hotel and in some of the rooms on the second floor. The ghost of a battle hero. The ghost of Andrew Jackson. According to the various accounts of those who have stayed in Andrew Jackson Hotel, the ghost of the hotel's namesake has remained as well. Guests report seeing the good general's actual apparition parading about the hotel, especially on the second floor of the hotel. Tim and the owner of the founder of Ghost City and resident paranormal investigator. Though it be incredibly exciting that General Jackson is haunting the hotel, what remains pressing the question of why? I highly encourage everyone to go and stay at the Andrew Jackson Hotel on the beautiful Royal Street in the French Quarter. And please be advised that you will have no ghostly encounters of disturbing nature. The spirits are quite friendly. And very, very, very possible you will not have an encounter at all. Tell them Ryan Mckern sent you. I would like to thank AngelJacksonHotel.com and GhostCityTours.com for research and making this video. Links for images and video on the YouTube page will be listed in the description. Please like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments what you'd like to hear me cover in a future episode of the Wicked Webs Wee Wee podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. And until we meet again, mon ami, au revoir.